necromancer of Fald. After the fall of night, the forests of dark Sylvania, those dread dominions which men, in reckless defiance, have named the wilds, are no place where any mortal would wish to linger, or worse still, heaven forbid, to lose his way. Of these ancient woods, the local lore speaks in hushed and fearful tones, recounting beings and events of such dark persuasion that even the boldest souls pale at their mention. And it is well to lend an ear to these old tales, for, as the proverb says, in every lie lies a kernel of truth. Beheld in their mournful grandeur, the veiled woodlands stretch endlessly, from the borderlands of Lyrian to the funereal mountains of Darkion, covering much of the central realms of Mãghion, lands such as mystic Weird, perpetually enwreathed in ill-omened mists, the dismal Morgborg, and Erdor, the mountainous kingdom of tunnels and subterranean palaces where the goblins dwell, of whom the chronicles tell little and the wise prefer silence. Yet folklore remains an inexhaustible well of legends, tales carried across generations, grim stories of mad cyclops, blood-drunk lycanates, demonic Orsarians, witches' sabbaths sworn to the unclean one, forsaken castles, the crypts of the Varkans, grimoires, chaining demons, fevered dreams, and mirrors that open to oniric realms unseen. Pitch-black clouds of oil drift from nowhere, phantom pilgrims and monstrous shapes haunt the glades, feeding the imagination of the poor forest folk who dwell scattered across the hills or in the rare clearings of this vast nocturnal dominion. Legends whisper that deeds of glory once unfolded here, monuments and solitary towers standing as mute witnesses to heroes whose names were swallowed by the mists of time. In the dim and uncertain glow of hearths within their moss-burrowed dwellings, the woodlanders whisper of tempests and unspeakable monsters, of cannibal tribes and armies of maladicts, the cursed dead who cross unseen mirrors from the mirrored realms to bring forth the night of the dead. It is an old law among these humble abodes that, when evening falls, all fires must be kindled, and none may wander beyond the enchanted circles of earth surrounding their villages. These barriers laid by local Magi, rare and dreaded beings who live as apostates and recluses in the depths of the wilds, or among the ruins of ancient castles and solitary towers. The names of some, such as Erdan, the Hermit of Fald, the Master of Lil, Melchior of Weird, or Abbot Skarn, are uttered with reverence throughout the land. They say that, though unseen, these are legendary figures who battle the terrors of the night, safeguarding the dreams of children and the hovels of the troglodytic forest folk. In solemn gratitude, the people leave offerings of food by wells or village shrines, believing the Magi may pass hungry through the night. Others wear amulets and charms containing bewitched salt, bay leaves, rabbit's paws, or small vials of elixirs to ward off the evil eye and the plague. Cloistered behind a steep and wind-tormented peak, where the wilderness of the tempest meets the steadfast labor of mortal hands, there lies a girdle of stone concealing the half-ruined walls of an ancient watch, a fortress old as the world's sorrow, hidden from all mortal eyes. It is a place fit for reflection, solitude, and the working of Magia, that savage, elemental force pulsing through the buried veins of these shrouded lands. Once a proud stronghold, the watch still bears the marks of its bygone majesty, broken ramparts, a solitary chapel, and a lone tower of vigil, its stones gnawed by centuries of wind and lamentation. Within its shadows, a handful of mountain folk servants move like ghosts among the moss-eaten stones, tending to the silent courtyards, as the gales shriek like wolves around the parapets. Here, the nights are dreadful and absolute. The only light falls in pale slants from the dim orbs of the heavens, and from the few watchfires that tremble upon the battlements like dying souls. The solitary tower serves as both laboratory and dwelling to its sole inhabitant, Erdan of Fald, for such is the name of this forgotten and petrified place. Now of venerable age, whispered to be more than 350 wheels, the hermit rarely ventures beyond his citadel. He spends his time in ceaseless study, delving through his tower's chambered vaults and the catacombs beneath, where lie hidden the sacred relics of the fortress, the crowns of the ancient kings of Mãghion, papyri, grimoires, and relics wrought in forbidden craft. For Erdan's art is among the most secret and ill-omened of all, the art of which men speak only in whispers, necromancy. Rarely seen, Erdan the Anacorete has forsaken the company of men, devoting his life to the dread science of the resurrection of the dead and communion with their restless souls. The mere rumor that he has prolonged his life by hundreds of wheels is terror enough to justify the fear and awe that shroud his name. In the chronicle, De Theocratia Sepulchralis, written by Melchior of Weird, there is mention of the tenebrous law of Erdan of Fald, he who brought again to life the knights of the fallen citadel, those called the maladicts, the return from the night of death. It is said that he made a secret covenant with the Varkans of the Underdome, pledging that the legions of the maladicts should not invade the realm of the living, though none can say what he paid in return for such protection. Some suggest that Erdan himself is a Varkan in disguise, a creature of the subterranean shadows, condemned to dwell in perpetual twilight as guardian of the mirrors between worlds, warden of the realm of the dead. Others claim he is a maledict, a cursed revenant, forever trapped between the planes. Yet among the Magi, there are those who whisper that Erdan is merely a man, a mortal who sacrificed his humanity upon the altar of forbidden knowledge. Whatever truth may hide behind these veils, one thing is certain. His mystery is the marrow of legend. A single document, tattered and unspeakably old, casts a pall of dread over all who dwell beneath the mourning boughs of dark Sylvania. It bears the title, Terrarium Dark Sylvaniae et Bestiarum Eius, the work of the infamous Abbot Skarn, that cursed ecclesiarch of Weird, of whom it's whispered he once shook the devil's hand. The manuscript, fragmented and fevered, is composed of scattered parchments, half-burned folios, and scrolls gathered from the dark abbeys and forbidden libraries of Mãghion. Upon these worm-eaten leaves, the abbot recounts the history of an ancient conflict, whose span is lost in the black mists of primordial time, when all continents were yet one under the name of Enuan, and men lived in uneasy peace with the amphibious folk of the great ocean. Within 3 surviving leaves, he writes of a vast army of the dead, led by cursed kings sworn to rise again and avenge their ancestral damnations. And then did Lizardirith, the unforgiving, arise from the ashes of Morgborg, leading his horde of maladicts through the mirror of Zirith, and they brought with them a night that burned, a terror that fed upon the hearts of men. They crossed the river Sanath, though the Magi had sown it with potent malefices, and their steeds, dead yet unyielding, trod the waters as if upon glass. Another scroll, discovered among the ruins of a burned citadel, recounts the fate of those who beheld this infernal host. And when they came upon the white plains of Weird, they were not seen from afar, for half were but skeletons, and the rest mere rags that moved. Then King Voltaire the Dauntless cast his crown upon the ground and fled into the woods, seeking counsel of witches. But the witches told him that his war was not against any living thing, and that no mortal blade could wound the dead. And the king trembled and wept as a child before madness took his mind. It is told that Voltaire was seized, bound to the tails of skeletal horses, and dragged before Lizardirith, who struck off his head with a blade of obsidian, impaling the skull upon a black lance, and bearing it before his legions as a standard of dread. Those wounded by the blades of the dead did not perish as mortals should. They fell, and in the same breath rose again, their eyes emptied, their tongues silenced, slaying brother, wife, and child alike, joining the ranks of the damned. A third document, the Liber Urbis Livananis, speaks of the great war fought at the foothills of Livanon, between the legions of Lizardirith and the Magi of Weird, those known as the Anaki, who wielded the rites of mirrored fire. It was a war that lasted 10 wheels and left the world trembling. When Lizardirith reached the girdle of Livanon, he pitched his forest of black tents where his legions of death made their lairs. Then the earth shook to its bones, and our sentinels upon the parapets beheld vast shadows moving against the moon. And lo, those shadows were the ferals, giant and eyeless, obeying only the will of their masters. They bore boulders as if pebbles and tore trees from the roots for clubs. And at the sound of a deep horn, they smote our walls with dreadful thunder, and many of our kin were crushed beneath their wrath. The text falters, parchment torn, ink turned to mold, but resumes trembling and lucid in its final passage. And so fell the valiant Arwen, the last keeper of Livanon, and all his generals with him. And great was the wailing within the walls. But then the Mãghi sent forth the ravens to the 4 corners of the world, calling for aid. After 7 days and 7 nights of despair, when hope had guttered like a dying flame, there arose cries upon the battlements. For across the plains there came a great host of Varkans and Lycans, black as the night that has forgotten the dawn. And at their head rode none other than the necromancer of Fald, upon his black steed whose eyes were coals of the underworld. He bore the staff and the clepsydra, and where he passed the dead turned to dust, their forms crumbling to ash before his shadow. For 3 long nights and days they fought, until driven back beyond the river Sanath, the maladicts threw themselves one by one into the mirror from which they had risen, abandoning their arms, their steeds, and their broken banners, vanishing into the obsidian depth from whence they came. Thus ended the great war between the maladicts and the Varkans, and the Varkans, too, withdrew into the black forests, from which they had been summoned by the necromancer. Thus conclude the written sources on Erdan of Fald. His person vanished into the whirl of passing wheels, becoming legend, and thence myth. Yet his shadow endures, whispered beneath the earthen roofs of mound dwellings and in the mire-stained huts of the dark Sylvanian folk, who through long winters huddle around their dim hearths and speak in trembling voices of the Mãghi of Mãghion and of the necromancer who bound the dead.